Okay, we are live.
Great. All right, thanks, Jenny. Hi, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining Sustainable Princeton's first Sustainable Minds speaker series on stormwater in Princeton. Looks like just a couple participants might still be populating from the waiting room. Actually, that looks like that's stabilized, so we'll go ahead. My name is Josh Perlspike, and I am the program coordinator here at Sustainable Princeton. And thank you to my colleagues, Molly Jones and Jenny Ledmer, for helping keep me and Zoom on track. Molly, next slide, please. Before we get started, we'd like to take a moment to thank our generous sponsor, NRG Energy, whose support allows us to bring you these events. Next slide. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website within a few days. You'll be able to find it by clicking on the Events tab and then Webinar Archives. Next slide. At any time during this webinar, we invite you to click on the Q&A button to enter questions. We will do our best to get them answered at the end. We will monitor them as they come in and then read them out loud rather than diving into the chat. Next slide. So this new Sustainable Minds format breaks down important sustainability topics into paired evening sessions, exploring complex issues just 1 hour at a time. During the first session, a local thought leader will provide insights on a regional climate concern. And then a week later, an action leader will provide practical examples of how any resident can help address these complex issues. So tonight we're joined by Jim Purcell from the municipality of Princeton. And please come back next week to hear from Marissa Imardino from AmeriCorps of New Jersey's Watershed Ambassador Program. When you registered for this event tonight, you signed up for both events. So you use the same Zoom link on April 6th at 7 p.m. And we will certainly send you a reminder. Next slide, please. Here at Sustainable Princeton, we frame all of our work through Princeton's Climate Action Plan. That includes 85 actions to reduce our community's greenhouse gas emissions and make us more resilient to the impacts of climate change. These actions are divided into 5 sectors: energy, land use, transportation, natural resources, materials management, and resiliency, which frames the conversation for tonight. An increase in severity and frequency of storms means greater potential for flood damage, risk to life and property, and costs to clean up after an event. Next slide, please. We're showing here data from the Office of the New Jersey Climatologist at Rutgers University. They track more than a century of local precipitation data. So we can see an increasing trend in Mercer County with record-breaking precipitation over 60 inches as recently as 2018, then 2011, and then longer gaps to 96 and 75. But our 10-year average over the last 10 years is over 48 inches of annual precipitation, with these record-breaking over 60, perhaps becoming a new normal for us. Next slide, please. So we'd like to begin with a brief survey to learn more about your experience with stormwater issues. I'll launch a poll now with 3 multiple choice questions. There we go. There is a scroll on the right-hand side of the poll. So you will need to scroll to answer them all. They're multiple choice. I'll read them through so you've got time, but by the time I'm done reading, we will go ahead and close it. So first, are you a homeowner, renter, or commercial property owner in Princeton? You can select homeowner, renter, or commercial property owner. Number 2, what watershed do you live in? The Millstone, the Stony Brook, Harry's Brook, I don't know, or what's a watershed? And Jim will give us the right answer to that one when he gets into his presentation. And number 3, have you experienced flooding at your property in Princeton? And you can answer yes, just once, yes, 2 times, yes, 3 or more, or no. Looks like a couple more are coming in. We'll give it 10 more seconds. Thank you. We're getting awesome participation in that. All right, we'll go ahead and close this poll. And share some of these results. So we have mostly homeowners, some renters. Our answers on watershed: we had 13% say the Millstone, 22% the Stony Brook, 22 Harrisbrook, 43% I don't know, and that is okay. That's why we have Jim and Marissa next week. And have you experienced flooding? Everyone. Let's see, of 24% said yes just once, 15% twice, 22% three or more, and 41% have not experienced flooding. Stop sharing that. All right, thank you for that. Next slide, please. All right, so tonight we have Jim Purcell, the Assistant Municipal Engineer for Princeton. He serves as the land use engineer responsible for the review of site plan and subdivision applications to the Planning Board and Zoning Board of Adjustment. Jim's career has spanned several decades in the civil engineering field as a consultant, educator, and advocate. In Princeton, he's responsible for ensuring that development and construction adhere to the goals of stormwater runoff management embodied in Princeton's ordinances. He is a licensed professional engineer in New Jersey, and an adjunct professor at the School of Engineering at the College of New Jersey, Just learned that he teaches on Tuesday and Thursday nights. He has been a member of the State Board of Professional Engineers and Land Surveyors since 2005 and served as president of the National Council of Examiners for Engineering and Surveying in 2018 and 19. He's a member of the National Society of Professional Engineers and the American Society of Civil Engineers. So with that, thank you so much, Jim, for being here, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Josh, and thank you for all of these participants who are here. I do, before I get started, want to say that I found it interesting that we had 55 answers when we had 54 possibilities of people to answer on that first poll. And then I will also say that there are a couple of correct answers to the second poll. Anybody who answered Millstone is correct, but we're going to be talking about subwatersheds this evening. Yes, we can start on the next slide. As you are aware, we are in Princeton, we've been subject to a lot of increased waterfall, rainfall from some very substantial storms over the recent years. Just to put into perspective, if you were to look at a map of Princeton, you would see a number of water bodies, lots of streams, some ponds, some dams, and most of Princeton consists of two major subwatersheds, the Stony Brook and Harrisbrook. We also contribute to other watersheds, including Beatons Brook and Van Horn Brook. Those are at the northern end of our municipality and drain over the border into Somerset County in Montgomery Township. We're mostly interested in the Stony Brook and Harrisbrook here in Princeton because they cover, probably about 90% of our land mass. Stony Brook drains East Amwell, West Amwell, Hopewell Township, Pennington, and Lawrence Township, all before it flows through Princeton. So we are downstream of a lot of contributory drainage areas into Princeton. So mitigation in the Stony Brook watershed, as I'll talk about a little bit about mitigation later, has to be taken on a regional basis. The Stony Brook watershed also includes parts of West Windsor, but that drains through Duck Run into the Stony Brook before it enters into the Millstone River. The next watershed that we're interested here, subwatershed, is Harrisbrook on the next slide. Did we skip to, I'm sorry. I'm still talking about Stony Brook. Stony Brook, the interesting thing about Stony Brook is it's mainly residential. It does have some contributions from the urban areas on the western side of Princeton, but those urban areas are less built up than our central business district, which contributes mainly to Harrisbrook. Most of the Stony Brook flow is from the adjoining municipalities, as I said. Note an interesting thing about Princeton is even though Princeton University is within the subwatershed of Stony Brook, it's really in a sub-subwatershed of its own. Princeton University drains into the Millstone River without actually draining into the Stony Brook before it goes into the Millstone River. That's an important aspect when we're talking about major development. Princeton University sort of sits on its own, and they have their own holistic approach to stormwater runoff. But as we work with them, we're always interested in our impacts downstream. So we work very closely with the university to make sure that they're meeting our requirements as well. I think the next slide is Harrisbrook. Nope, still talking about Stony Brook. As I said, Stony Brook drains East Amwell, West Amwell. But you can see in this, this map that it is a very large watershed. It is the watershed it's kind of hard to see on here, but if you look right in the center of the map, it says Stony Brook Watershed with a couple of arrows and leaders showing how large that is. Princeton is the smaller part of it over to just to the east of that. And there's a lot of drainage area that comes into it. So our main concern with the Stony Brook is not so much how much water we're contributing, but how do we manage the floodwaters that flow down Stony Brook as it comes through Princeton and into the Millstone River? And what can we do on a regional basis with our partners, mostly in Hopewell, Pennington, and Lawrence? As we get up into East and West Amwell, they contribute less runoff to the Stony Brook watershed because they are not so urbanized. Most of the runoff is from farmland and forested lands, whereas Hopewell, Pennington, and Lawrence contribute some urban flow, if you will, some more impervious areas that drain into it. So we've started a dialogue with them to talk about how we can have regional mitigation efforts. And they're considering adopting some of our ordinances, which is what I will be mostly discussing this evening, is how Princeton has approached reduction of stormwater runoff into our streams. Am I finally at Harrisbrook? Yes, the Harrisbrook watershed is highly urbanized. As you can see on the map on the left-hand side, Harrisbrook, the main branch of Harrisbrook is the long stretch that is in the lower part of that picture, and the other long stretches that converge with it right at that point are actually just tributaries. They're named tributaries of Harrisbrook. They're actually numbered tributaries, and we have a few smaller tributaries that contribute to Harrisbrook. The interesting thing about Harrisbrook is it actually begins downtown at the intersection of Holfish Street and Witherspoon Street and Spring Street. Historically, Spring Street was named because there was a spring. It was a lake. It got filled in, and currently Heinz Plaza and our parking garage sit where that lake used to be. But all of the drainage in the downtown area enter into a culvert, and that culvert continues to carry those waters from the urbanized area until they daylight at North Harrison Street, and then continue in an open stream into the Millstone River. So the highly urbanized nature of the Harrisbrook watershed is one that we're very concerned about, and one where we are trying to mitigate as much as we can as projects move forward. The map on the right-hand side is the delineation of the watershed. It's very difficult. I'm not sure, Molly, if you can highlight the light blue line that delineates the watershed. There's the dark blue line there, and then right, yeah, that's the Harrisbrook watershed, Molly. Very good. Just a couple of different views, one from with the topography and one without. Next slide, please. Our challenges are to reduce the quantity of flows into the streams. That's the best way that we can mitigate for flooding, the rise of stormwater, and the rapid increase in the water surface elevations of our streams is to reduce the quantity that we put into those streams. It seems pretty common sense, but it's not as easy as it seems to just cut off flows into the streams. The other is to improve the quality of the runoff. Water running off of impervious surfaces carries pollutants. Water running off of pervious surfaces like lawns and farmland also carry nutrients, which can be considered as pollutants. Most importantly, phosphorus and nitrogen that can damage our streams and the ability of aquatic and aquatic life and flora to survive. We also want to increase groundwater recharge. Groundwater recharge is extremely difficult for us to do in Princeton because almost all of Princeton has a soil type that is not amenable to infiltration. And it's difficult for us to make sure that water infiltrates into our soils before it runs off. So most of our soils are, we could almost consider all of Princeton to be impervious because the soils are so dense. So those are the challenges that we face. Obviously, quantity, we want to reduce quantity to reduce the chance of flooding, but because flooding, one of the consequences of flooding is that waters flow faster. And because they flow faster, they contribute to erosion of the banks. We start losing land. Soil gets suspended into the water and then travels downstream. As we erode our banks, we have the potential for trees to fall. The plants can't survive. Roots are inundated. Trees die. The important thing to remember is that everyone lives downstream. As I've already said, we live downstream from everyone from East Amwell, West Amwell, Pennington, Hopewell, but somebody lives downstream from us. And we should always be cognizant of the fact that even though we may not be susceptible to flooding on our own property, what runs off of our property contributes to flooding of someone else's property. And we want to be good neighbors. So, continuing on, Molly. So here's the solutions. New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection promulgates regulations based for flood hazard areas and stormwater management. More recently, as of back in 2020, they promulgated a new rule that went into effect on March 2nd, 2021. That new rule established requirements for development. The most concern is major development, and major development means an individual development as well as multiple developments that individually or collectively result in. So we have to look at things in a holistic fashion to determine whether or not they meet any of these requirements. It's considered a major development if you have a 1 or more acres of land that's disturbed since February 2nd, 2004. That's an interesting concept. It means that the developer and anyone reviewing it has to look back at the records to see what was in place in 2004 and determine whether or not in the last 18 years we've had additions of more disturbance of land, development on that piece of land, So we look at it on a cumulative basis. If we've created 1/4 acre or more of regulated impervious surface since that date, we also need to consider that a major development. If there's been a creation of 1/4 acre or more of regulated motor vehicle surface since this regulation went into effect, the reason they chose March 2nd, 2021 is because regulated motor vehicle surface was not defined prior to that. A regulated motor vehicle surface is any surface that a gas-powered or diesel, a fossil fuel-powered vehicle will travel on a roadway or be parked on a parking area or in a driveway. Those are regulated motor vehicle surfaces. The importance of that and the reason that they separate regulated impervious surfaces and regulated motor vehicle surfaces is because we're interested mostly in water quality improvements from the regulated motor vehicle surface. The other impervious surfaces don't necessarily contribute to degradation of our surface waters, so there are no requirements to do water quality on regulated impervious surfaces, just the motor vehicle surfaces. And then if you have a combination of both 2 and 3 above that totals an area of 1/4 acre or more, you are considered a major development. So what did Princeton do? Because those NJDEP regulations went into effect on March 2nd, 2021, every major development in Princeton would have been required to meet those requirements. Next slide, Molly. So what did Princeton do? We redefined major development. The New Jersey DEP rules allow municipalities to promulgate more stringent regulations than the DEP has. So our major development means any development that individually or collectively since February 2nd, 2004 results in either disturbance of 1/2 or more acres of land. That's half of what the DEP set as major. The DEP says 1 acre. We have reduced it to 1/2 acre. Or an increase in impervious surface of 5,000 square feet. If you recall on the last slide, it was 1/4 acre. So we've reduced that even more. And that 5,000 square feet is approximately a half of a 1/2 acre, 1/4 acre. Major development includes all developments that are part of a common plan of development or sale, for example, a phased residential development that collectively or individually meet the above criteria. And keep in mind, again, that this is cumulative. So a developer cannot come in and develop a small portion of a property and then come back and develop another small portion of the property, stay under these, under these thresholds and say, I don't have to do stormwater management. We're going to add them up. So if they come in and they do 2,500 square feet, and then a year from now come in and do 2,500 square feet, they've met the threshold. They are then a major development under these regulations. Next slide. So what do we say? A major commercial development is 5,000 plus square feet of new impervious surface. Note that I'm saying commercial. One of the things that our ordinance cannot do and does not do, and it's stated that an exemption exists. We are not allowed under the residential site improvement standards to have more stringent regulations than the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection regulations. So major developments that are of a residential housing nature do not have to comply with our stormwater management regulations. They do have to comply with the New Jersey DEP regulations. So we cannot call a housing development that is less than a 1/4 acre of new impervious as a major development. In the minds of the DEP, it's still a minor development. So that's why I'm adding the term commercial developments here, because we can apply our regulations only to commercial developments. Our stormwater management ordinance for major developments is ordinance number 2020-38. It was passed in 2020, hence the reason that it's a 2020 ordinance. However, it also went into effect on March 1st, 2021, which was the effective date of the new New Jersey DEP regulations. It requires that development look at low impact development to reduce runoff. I'll discuss a little bit of that after I finish this slide. It requires that they provide water quality control, water quantity control, and groundwater recharge. Quantity reduction is similar to what the NJDEP requires. You have to reduce the 2-year storm runoff to be 50% of what it was before you started development. You have to reduce the 10-year runoff to be 75% of the pre-developed runoff, the way the development was prior to you starting your development. And you have to reduce your runoff to 80% of the 100-year runoff that was there during the pre-development before you developed it. And then quality control requires removal of at least 80% of total suspended solids. And remember, quality control is only required for runoff that leaves a motor vehicle surface, a regulated motor vehicle surface. Low impact development. I actually just had a developer come in today, and one of the things that they wanted to do was to, for their subdivision, use a porous pavement and stormwater retention underneath that pavement, and hopefully recharge and use the pavement as their stormwater management. Even if the stormwater management will not work, and we hope it will, they have to go through and do some testing and figure out whether or not they can get the infiltration that they need. But even if it doesn't, the use of porous pavement for their roadways is considered a low impact development. I'm just using that as an example, a low impact development technique. So we would encourage developers to take those kind of measures and disturb as little of the existing land as possible when they're doing their site development. So reduce the disturbance to the minimum amount that they can, provide development techniques that contribute to a reduction in stormwater runoff, keep as much of the vegetation and flora in place as possible. Do not cut down any trees unless they're absolutely necessary. All of those things are considered low impact development. Quantity reduction, we have had some interesting ways of reducing quantity in Princeton. There are some nuances to the rules about how what techniques can be used to reduce quantity. For example, green infrastructure cannot be used to reduce quantity if the drainage area is greater than 2.5 acres. So we will see much smaller detention basins under these regulations. And they're not really detention basins because they are bio retention basins, hopefully draining to provide recharge or at least evapotranspiration. Quality control typically will require developers to provide manufacture treatment devices, structures that will remove suspended solids, and those will have to be maintained and periodically cleaned and the materials disposed of properly. Molly, next slide, please. We've also gone above and beyond NJDEP regulations, and we have looked at other commercial developments that don't meet the definition of a major development and created a category of minor commercial developments. Those minor commercial developments are also required to abide by the rules in ordinance number 2020-38. But as rule writers go, they love to cross-reference things. So minor development is actually directed over to ordinance 2020-39, which I'll talk about in a minute, to use those techniques that are in 2020-39. For minor commercial developments, we simply require water quantity control. Since it's less than 5,000 square feet, we're not asking them to provide us with quality control. We're only asking that they control what is really the equivalent of the 2-year storm. But that quantity control has to be achieved through green infrastructure. We'll go through a list of what green infrastructure techniques are available in a little bit, but there are a series of different things, and most people will think of green infrastructure as a rain garden or a small-scale bioretention basin. Even though we don't require quality control for minor developments, we do achieve quality control. I keep saying quality control by retaining. They must retain 0.78 gallons of runoff per square foot of new impervious area. That 0.78 gallons represents the 1¼ inch storm, which is the definition of a water quality storm. So since we're retaining it on site, it's not allowed to leave the site. We are achieving quality control over the entire impervious surface, not just the motor vehicle surfaces that may be part of a minor commercial development. So in that way, we've got the commercial developments covered. We've also gone above and beyond NJDEP regulations, and we regulate single family and 2-family homes. No, that's fine, Molly. Back, that's where I was. Yep. Single family and 2-family residential projects. We've broken them into large projects and small projects. If you have a residential project, and a residential project could be anywhere from a new house to an addition, a patio, a deck, even putting in concrete pads for HVAC equipment. Those are impervious surfaces, so we add them up. Porches, pools, swimming pools, anything that is considered an impervious area, we add all of these up. If it's greater than 5,000 square feet, you're actually required to do the stormwater management measures that are required in the ordinance 2020-38 for a major development. As I said, we cannot regulate developments of multifamily housing that is subject to the residential site improvement standards, but we are allowed to regulate those that are not subject to those standards. Minor projects are small projects. Next, Molly. Small projects. If you create more than 400 square feet of new impervious surface, but less than 5,000 square feet, you're subject to Stormwater Management Ordinance 2020-39, which again requires water quantity control. This is the same as the minor development ordinance. You have to provide quantity control for 2 gallons of runoff per square foot of new impervious area. And we achieve that quality control because we're requiring the retention of 0.78 gallons of runoff per square foot of new impervious area. What was I going to say about small projects? Go to the next slide, Molly. So what are large and small projects, and what have we learned from large and small projects? I've already said large and small projects could be anything from a whole new house to as small as a 400 square foot patio addition. Homeowners, developers, builders, the lessons we've learned is that they really don't want to put in anything additional if they don't have to. So there are attempts to stay under the thresholds, and that actually is a good thing. It is achieving our goals by not increasing impervious areas. So if we can stay under the thresholds and minimize the amount of new impervious surfaces that we're building in the municipality, we're achieving some of those goals of reducing quantity of runoff. The lessons we've learned as we've gone through, and we've had 1 year and 1 month, almost 1 month of this ordinance being in place. One thing that we note is that although there are a number of green infrastructure options, 99% of the time we're putting in a rain garden. They are quite typical, but I want to run through the different, where is that? There's a list of green infrastructure. And one very important point, sorry about that, I am scrolling through the ordinance as I speak. Well, one very important point about green infrastructure. Green infrastructure includes things such as grass-lined swales, rain gardens, small-scale bioretention facilities, grass filter strips, even rain barrels are considered green infrastructure. We also included in the definition are dry wells and cisterns. We frown on dry wells and cisterns, and our ordinance actually says that you cannot put in a dry well or a cistern in Princeton without having demonstrated that you cannot do it through any of the other green infrastructure techniques. So vegetative filter strips, small scale sand filters, small scale infiltration basins. One of the things that we've noticed is that most of the time projects will come in from developers or even from individual property owners, and they'll automatically jump to a rain garden and then find out that a rain garden cannot work. We've had at times people come to us and say, I've tried a rain garden, I've tried a small scale infiltration basin, I've tried pervious paving systems, green roofs, vegetative filters, I've tried everything, but I can't get my stormwater to meet the requirement using any of those techniques. And then a light bulb goes off because I'll say to them, have you tried a combination? How about draining your roof to a grass-lined vegetative swale that drains into a small-scale bioretention basin that then drains out over a vegetative filter strip into the woods that happen to be in your backyard? I like to consider this small project and large project residential improvements to stormwater management as a landscaping project. These are not deep basins. You sometimes can get away with 6 inches. A depression in your backyard planted with the appropriate plants will provide evapotranspiration, and soil remediation underneath that will provide you with the ability to retain the 0.78 gallons per square foot that's required. If in fact you cannot get it all done, we have the option of allowing you to do the best that you can and then connect directly to our municipal storm sewer system. We do, however, try to work with homeowners to make sure that they are passing water runoff through a small scale green infrastructure system before it then discharges directly to our storm sewer system. As you can imagine, downtown in a highly urbanized area, that sometimes is not at all possible. The other lesson learned is that everybody's property is unique. And we have a great team here in the Princeton Engineering Department that works tirelessly with property owners and builders and developers to make sure that we're doing the best that we can to get it done. On the other side of the coin, we have projects that voluntarily go above and beyond. We've had property owners that have made major improvements to their properties, but have not even triggered the 400 square foot threshold, but they want to put in rain gardens and bioretention swales for their existing facilities. So we've worked with them to be able to do that as well. We also have many times that since somebody is putting in a rain garden because they're putting in a patio and they have ideas that sometime in the future they may be adding putting an addition or adding a deck or expanding or putting in a pool, they may oversize their stormwater management system in anticipation of the future. We try to make sure that the records are in place because one of the other things that I forgot to mention about large and small projects is this is also cumulative. In the case of residential properties, the large and small projects have to have a look back provision to June of 2017, which was actually when we first promulgated a stormwater management ordinance that required on-site stormwater management for single-family and two-family homes. So we like to have on file records of the past work that's been done on your property. And if you are going to do something, just yesterday, as a matter of fact, a developer came to us with a proposal to build a rain garden that had capacity for an additional 211 square feet of impervious surface above and beyond what they were building. We'll put that in the file. And if the property owner comes to us 4 or 5 years from now and says, I want to expand my deck, I'm going to do it, it's going to be another 100 square feet, we won't require them then to add to the stormwater management system because they've already got it covered. Molly, I think the next slide, okay, is major and minor developments. So we've learned some lessons here. I think the biggest lesson here is that we have found that major and minor developments are complying with our ordinance. And it should of 2020-38. The residential developments are also complying with NJDEP regulations. And what I would like to point out is that because some of the developers are actually residents of Princeton, I'm not sure if that's the reason they're doing it, but they're actually complying with our regulations as well. So we do see developments that come in that do not have to go above and beyond, but they are going above and beyond and doing things more, doing more to mitigate the runoff from their properties than they actually have to, because they only have to abide by NJDEP regulations. In one major development that we've had recently, we had a developer that was putting in a major housing project and utilizing existing stormwater facilities that are on site, still having to meet the NJDEP regulations for water quality and water quantity and stormwater recharge. But because they were actually passing it through prior existing detention basins, those detention basins had been constructed to provide stormwater management of a pre-development condition of no development. This was a redevelopment of a site that was almost entirely impervious. They actually had they would have been able to say, are the difference between our pre-development flows and our post-development flows are based on basically a parking lot and an office park. But instead they said they took the pre-development flows that were as if that office park had not existed, because they were running it through basins that were built for that office park at a time when the property was wooded. So they actually went well above and beyond to reduce the amount of runoff that's going into the stream once the project is done. I think the biggest lesson we've learned is that everyone wants to do their part, and everyone wants to assist in reducing runoff and improving water quality. They also want to meet the requirements for recharge, but it's very, very difficult. And we do have a provision, as DEP has a provision of granting variances for recharge. And that is probably the variance that we have to grant most often, because you just cannot get the infiltration rate in our soils that is 70. You have to drain within 72 hours, and it's just not possible. Our soils are way too tight. Do I have another slide? I do. There is a cheat sheet for everyone in Princeton, stormwater management for small projects on 1 or 2 family residential properties. And it describes what I have discussed this evening. There is that list of stormwater runoff techniques: green infrastructure measures, grass swales, green roofs, pervious paving systems, small scale bioretention basins or rain gardens, small scale infiltration basins. One of the small scale infiltration basin, as I said, a very difficult thing to actually get to work. Small scale sand filters and vegetative filter strips are the preferred measures. And there are a lot of resources on here for how to do it. One final note that I'd like to talk about is that we have found it's very busy in Princeton. There's a lot of development happening in Princeton. There's a lot of development happening on 1 and 2 family residential properties. Property owners who want to improve their own property are finding it very difficult to abide by these regulations, because this is not something that they can honestly do themselves. They have to find a professional that can assist them, and the professionals are all very busy. It's become a bit expensive to just get a rain garden designed in Princeton. So in discussions with our Flood and Stormwater Commission, we have decided that we are going to develop for those single family, those individual property owners, we're going to develop a procedure whereby we can provide them with standard details, standard plantings, provide them with assistance in designing their own rain garden, with an assumption that infiltration will be extremely minimal, and that soil remediation will have to take place. So we are planning on assisting individual property owners, including going out in the field, meeting with them, determining an appropriate place for rain gardens. But there will be a requirement that they have to hire a certified landscaper. We are compiling a list of those certified landscapers who have been certified to design and construct rain gardens for success. So if you are a property owner who is looking to do an improvement, please reach out to my office. We will assist you in every way possible, and try to get you through this process in the most painless way that we can think of. And I believe that's it. I think, Josh, we can start answering some questions.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. Perfect way to actually lead into one of the later questions came in about resources. So the page that you put up, stormwater management for small projects on 1 and 2 family residential properties, folks can find that on the municipal website. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, let's go to a different question.
All right, well, we'll make sure that there are resources shared. We can send follow-up email.
And there are other resources regarding that. I believe it's on the website. I'm just not sure exactly where on the website. I'd have to go find it.
When we post we'll post the slides from this presentation on the Sustainable Princeton website. The recording will be available. And when we post those slides on our website, we'll make sure that we post a list of resources available from the municipality there as well. So that's great. I'm going to go. All right, I'm going to give you an easy one. Easy for you, Jim. We had a question: which watershed Carnegie Lake is considered to be in?
Carnegie Lake is actually part of the Millstone River, so it is in the Millstone River watershed, and we're all in the Millstone River watershed, which is actually a sub-watershed of the Raritan River.
Excellent. Question from Tammy. Shout out to the PEC. Question about limiting pesticide and fertilizer use on lawns to support improved quality of stormwater runoff.
Tammy's not allowed to ask me questions. Tammy, that's something that I think PEC should take up, but we do not have any specific regulations above and beyond what the state requires in terms of management of pesticides and fertilizers. Princeton doesn't have anything special.
I was interested to hear you talk about the improvements that property owners can take, really being viewed holistically as landscaping projects and not necessarily as, first and foremost, green infrastructure. And I think that Tammy's question sort of gets at a bigger picture, sustainable landscaping, which is certainly something that we're interested in working towards around town. Question from someone who lives on Harry's Brook or close to it, runs behind their property. The loss of water damage and loss that it's caused along properties, asking about abatement support that the municipality provides.
And I see she's asking about financial support. Unfortunately, we don't have financial support for that kind of damage. The Harry's Brook runs through private properties. The municipality does not own Harry's Brook. One of the things that has been a little disconcerting to us, or at least since I've come on board, is that Harry's Brook is a mapped stream up to Snowden Lane. And I noticed that she lives downstream of Snowden Lane, I guess. And there's a 100-year floodplain mapped by the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Upstream of Snowden Lane, upstream of Snowden Lane and up to Harrison Street, it was not mapped. For some reason, some decision was made that where it is in the borough, FEMA would not bother mapping it. So we have just finished surveying the stream with the intent of making sure that we have 100-year flood mapping of the stretch of Harry's Brook that is in an open channel from North Harrison Street to Snowden. We will get Federal Emergency Management Agency to update the flood insurance rate maps based on that. And that allows us now to look at mitigation measures that we can take for those people who are downstream of that area. It is a very volatile stream. We've heard I can't tell you whether or not this is a true source, but some people have said it's the flashiest stream in the United States. We know that waters rise extremely quickly. And as I said, a lot of that is due to the fact that it drains most of the central business district. What some people don't know, and I'll let everybody know right now, is that as part of our Witherspoon Street Improvement Project, we are constructing underground detention facilities to slow down and mitigate some of that runoff going into the culvert that carries Harry's Brook. So as part of that project that's starting up right now, we will be adding in mitigation to reduce not reduce the amount of flow, but reduce the rate of flow into Harry's Brook. And that could go a long way to assist those people who live on the brook.
Great. A question, so your general theme, lesson learned that everyone lives downstream, sort of on a smaller scale too. A question about rain gardens for projects. I'm not sure if this person is quoting something from an ordinance, but rain gardens that then remaining water can flow onto the existing path off-site, which of course is going to be a neighbor or a neighboring property. How I guess are those considerations? You're making changes to your property, you have to install this infrastructure, but no matter what, water is going to end up on your neighbor's property.
No matter what, our ordinance only requires you to manage essentially the 2-year storm, 2 gallons per square foot of impervious area. And that management doesn't say that you have to keep it on your property. Prior to you doing anything, that water was flowing off your property anyway. As was the 0.78 gallons that we're now requiring you to retain on your property. That water will not flow off the property. What we have been finding, another lesson learned, is that a lot of the professionals will design a rain garden that then has a spillway or a pipe that discharges toward a property line. And we work with them to make sure that is modified. I've worked with them to tell them we don't want spillways. If you need a spillway for some engineering reason, that spillway needs to be wide and spread out the flow after it gets over it. I'd prefer that the rain gardens were just retaining the 0.78 gallons, and that the runoff from the additional runoff would just flow overland over the berm. If you're going to have a pipe discharge, that pipe can't discharge to a point because that's not the way the water flowed before you put in the rain garden. We want it to run across open land, a lawn, a grass filter strip, into the woods, things like that. So as I said, we try to work on every project is unique. We try to make sure that the discharges are least impacted, the least impactful or impacting the neighbors to the least amount, and also impacting our own systems. Obviously don't want it flowing across sidewalks if it didn't flow across sidewalks before.
Okay. On smaller interventions, I'm going to combine 2 questions. Do you see or encourage use of downspout planters on properties with limited yard space? And maybe related, why does the municipality frown on the use of dry wells and cisterns?
So the first part of that question is, and I have an example. We had a home, 2-family home that was designed, had to get a zoning permit. They were required to put in a rain garden. The rain garden took up the entire backyard, which is not practical for families with young children. You want some area that they can actually enjoy in the backyard and not have to be worried about trampling rain garden plants and things like that. So we worked with them. They actually ended up adding rain barrels at each of the downspouts on the building, and we were able to reduce the rain garden to half the size that it had been designed for. So we do encourage those kinds of green infrastructure. We don't, if it's in that list, we don't say no. Dry wells and cisterns have been shown to fail for the reason that I've said. They don't drain. There's no infiltration. They fill up after the first storm. After the next storm, they're still full. So they're not operating as they're intended to. And in addition, they become, you've taken all of that water, put it into they all have overflows. You've now concentrated all that water into a point discharge that didn't exist before, when it used to run off across your lawn or through a swale. So I came here. I've actually only been here. I've been here less than 2 years. The first thing I had to do was go out and inspect a dry well that was failing. I have not seen a dry well in this municipality that works. So we definitely discourage them.
Got it. All right, so we are at 8 o'clock. I think that we will sort of respect everyone's time. I know Jim has had a long day. I want to get one more question, sort of maybe a combination. I'll let you, Jim, take wherever you want it to go. You talked about regional mitigation efforts, working with upstream and downstream municipalities, because we're all downstream, whether it's single property or municipality. Wondering sort of what those ideal efforts might look like. Another part of that is Princeton innovative? Are we a leader or a follower in this respect? And then I have to give the last final part of that question to Christine Symington, our current program director, incoming executive director, who is on vacation, first vacation in a long time, but is here watching.
She's still on vacation, because I see she's here.
She's here, but she asked, what gives you hope about Princeton and its stormwater challenges?
Well, let's start with the regional. We had a meeting I have to give a shout out to the Watershed Institute. They arranged this regional discussion. And of course, the Watershed Institute works on a watershed basis. And they arranged for the engineering departments of the townships, and it was Hopewell, Pennington, Lawrence, and Princeton, because those are the ones that are affected the most by the Stony Brook. So we started it at that level instead of at the elected officials level. The elected officials were all aware that we're getting together and discussing this. One of the ideas is that those municipalities also adopt an ordinance similar to ours, so that they start to reduce the amount of flow going into the Stony Brook. We're also looking at what can they do, and it sounds disingenuous a little bit, but we'd like them to stop water from coming into our town. So what can they do to provide flood mitigation? And maybe we participate in that in some regional stormwater mitigation plan, to where we can find some open land where we can bring runoff, bring some of the flows from Stony Brook into that land and slow things down a little bit. A third thing that we're looking at is a stormwater utility. Should that be a stormwater utility for each of our individual towns? Should it be based on a watershed? Should it be our 3 towns together in a regional stormwater utility that then collects fees from contributors to the watershed, and uses that to mitigate the floodwaters? We are just now embarking on a feasibility study to determine how that might look. So that's a very hopeful thing, Christine. We're also, our Flood and Stormwater Commission, we have a subcommittee looking at Princeton holistically, and how can we, where can we have stormwater mitigation and flood mitigation projects take place? I have a pet project I'd like to implement. It happens to be in a green acre encumbered land, so we have to work with the State House Commission to determine whether or not we can actually divert that property and use it for stormwater purposes. but we're looking everywhere. We've got a long list of stormwater initiatives. They take time. Just mapping Harry's Brook is taking time. And once we know how Harry's Brook actually works, I know everybody that lives on Harry's Brook knows how it works. But we need numbers, we need data, and then we can work on correcting the problems that we have in our brooks.
Great, thank you. I'll give one quick plug to the CAPERS team, which is part of Sustainable Princeton and also the university climate action plan emissions reduction strategy. They've been working with Jim, your office, and on a stormwater mapping project to map with GIS every single inlet in roadways. And Andrew Filippi in the engineering department too has had some really forward-thinking conversations about how to expand that mapping to all other stormwater assets and pull that into a regional initiative.
And we have a consultant that is expanding on that project as well, and mapping the pipes, the directions of flow, how things are connected. We do not have a good map at all. We hope that with those two things going on, we'll have about 80%. Interestingly, NJDEP is getting ready to promulgate a rule that says all municipalities must have their stormwater, their drainage systems mapped within 59 months of the adoption of the new rule. We're well on our way to doing that, so we're not too concerned that 5 years from now we will be able to meet their requirement, because we hope to have that requirement met within a year or two. It's interesting what and this is not just Princeton. This is not a diss on anybody, but it's interesting what we don't know in terms of infrastructure. Infrastructure in most municipalities has been constructed piecemeal over many, many, many years, and records have not always been kept. So getting a handle on what our infrastructure actually looks like is the first step toward correcting the problems that we face.
Great. Well, thank you. I'm going to, Holly's bringing this up. Thank you. Wanted to thank you so much, Jim, for being here with us. Thank you to everyone who attended. Wanted to remind you that 1 week from today, April 6th at 7 p.m. is the second part of this with Marissa Imardino. She'll be talking about what any resident, any property owner can do to get involved in stormwater action. Actually, don't even need to be a property owner. She'll talk about ways to get involved in citizen science and watershed initiatives. So a little bit of a different take on things you can do immediately. You don't have to have a development application in process. So hope you will join us for that. And again, we will post this presentation along with additional resources on our website. And if you sign up for our newsletter, you will know, you'll be the first to know when that is available. Any additional questions, please feel free to email us, info@sustainableprinceton.org. And thank you again. Good night.